Hello, I'd like to talk a few minutes about what's going on in the Middle East as we approach the Easter, the celebration of Easter in the Christian faith, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the politics of the Holy Land is what we want to think about for just a moment, not in any great detail, but just in general with the backdrop of Easter upon us. First, the Middle East, and here's a map that outlines in color the primary countries that are considered part of the Middle East, broadly speaking. And the areas that we'll focus on today are the Holy Land, Israel. And here's a map of Israel showing Gaza Strip and the West Bank and Jerusalem. And there we still see Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt on this map with the Mediterranean Sea there to the west. A land of turmoil, as we'll focus on the Gaza Strip. And as you see here in this detail, you can look up the map later online or any number of maps to show the circumstances under which the Palestinians have been living in Israel for several years now. And the context today, of course, in the news is Israel and Palestine conflict. And here's a picture of some destroyed buildings, apartment buildings, and whatnot, and just the basic destruction that's going on in the Gaza Strip. And it's been over 5 months now, I think approaching 6 months since the conflict has been going on. And so all that is going on in the context of a region of the world where we have faiths colliding, three major monotheistic faith traditions, all tracing their roots to Abraham and his descendants. And here we see a picture of the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Wailing Wall, and the crowded conditions of the old city of Jerusalem and just that region. And again, just for some of us, perhaps in the West in particular, and in America in particular, a land that has had inhabitants for thousands of years, and the context of a history of conflict in this region, and conflict that is centered in part on family history, in part on religious history, in part on economic history. And so while I've entitled this particular slide, When Faiths Collide, we actually see a collision today of competing interests, both with respect to faith and with respect to economics and with respect to history, the history of the peoples of the land. And here we see a chart of sacred spaces, how the old city of Jerusalem is divided into the four quarters: the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, and the Armenian quarter, with the Temple Mount there. And some of the details on this map indicate the different holy sites for the different faith traditions, some of which are within technically other quarters. You have the Omar Mosque in the Christian quarter, you have St. Anne's Church in the Muslim quarter. But the thing about Christianity and what Easter celebrates is summed up in 1 Corinthians 13:13, the last portion of that verse actually. The greatest of these is love. And when we talk about love and what it means, we see in this picture representation looking out of an empty cave. We see three crosses on a hill in the distance, and symbolizing, representing what God did from the Christian perspective in sending his son, God the Son, Jesus Christ, to earth to perform miracles, not primarily, to teach great lessons, not primarily. Jesus' primary reason for being sent was to be offered up as a sacrifice for the sin of mankind, as demanded by God, a just God, for the sin of mankind. And yet the story didn't end there with Jesus on the cross. Jesus was buried, and then 3 days later, as celebrated on Easter Sunday, was raised from the dead to bear testimony to the power of God and God's love to overcome even death. And that is the primary testimony that ought to be coming from the Christians. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And as we face the frustrations, the trials, the conflicts in day-to-day life, as we try to make sense of a world that often seems to have no sense whatsoever, as we try to reflect on history as we understand it and anticipate as best we can what the future holds, the central theme for the Christian ought to be reflected in the fact that God loves and that God, through his Son Jesus Christ, made it possible for us to live not only in right relationship with God, but in right relationship with each other as human beings, as we are called to live our lives in such a way that the love of God is manifest and a lost and dying world comes to know who God is. So, as we navigate the currents of life, the challenge for the Christian is to interact with a lost world in a way that highlights the central theme of Christianity, for God so loved the world. So, whatever our different opinions on what's going on in the world today, even in the context of the Holy Land as viewed from the traditions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the Christian ought to be called to task by his or her understanding of, reflection on what it means for God to love the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son to die for the sins of that world, as we seek to find a way to live in a world that is torn apart by sin. Thank you all very much. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Bye bye. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those. And as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye bye.